The philosopher Blaise Pascal once wrote something that stopped me cold the first time I read it. He said that all of humanity's problems stem from the inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Let me repeat. All of humanity's problems stem from the inability to sit quietly in a room alone. All of humanity's problems. Not some of them. All of them. Pascal was not being dramatic. He was pointing at something profound. The reason people stay in relationships that are wrong for them. The reason people spend money they do not have. The reason people distract themselves from morning until night. The reason people never quite become the version of themselves they imagined in their most honest moments. It is because modern life has made silence unbearable and stillness feel like a threat. This audiobook is about learning to use that silence. It is about learning to sit inside that discomfort long enough to let something extraordinary happen on the other side of it. What I am going to share with you over the next several hours is not another self-help system promising overnight results. I am not going to sell you affirmations or morning routines or productivity hacks. I am going to offer you something far more radical, far more ancient, and far more effective. I am going to offer you the monk mode protocol. The monk mode protocol is a deliberate, structured period of 90 to 100 days in which you temporarily withdraw from the chaos of ordinary life in order to do something that modern culture has almost made impossible. You are going to rebuild yourself from the inside out. Not by running away from your life. Not by abandoning your responsibilities. Not by becoming cold, distant, or antisocial. But by creating enough uninterrupted silence, enough psychological space, enough protected attention, that your mind finally has room to do what it has been trying to do all along. Heal, clarify, create, and become. This is a season, not a lifestyle, not a permanent withdrawal from the world. Think of it the way a farmer thinks about winter. The ground goes quiet. Nothing appears to be happening. But underneath the surface, everything is being prepared. The soil is regenerating. The roots are deepening. The nutrients are returning. And when spring arrives, the growth that emerges is stronger, more resilient, and more beautiful than anything that could have grown in the noise of summer. You are about to enter your winter. And by the time you are finished, the world will be meeting a different version of you. Not a different person, the real one. The one that was always there, buried beneath years of distraction, performance, noise, and survival. Over the coming chapters, we will move through every dimension of what this protocol involves. We will talk about attention, because attention is the currency of transformation. We will talk about environment, because your surroundings are shaping your behavior in ways you cannot yet see. We will talk about relationships, because some of the people in your life are quietly keeping you small. We will talk about digital addiction, deep work, identity, physical health, emotional healing, solitude, discipline, purpose, and finally, how to re-enter the world without losing everything you built during your season of silence. Every chapter in this book is designed to do one thing. Change the way you think. Not just inspire you. Not just comfort you. Actually shift the internal architecture that has been producing the results you are no longer satisfied with. So if you are ready, let us begin. Let us begin at the root of everything. The thing you cannot see but that controls almost everything you do. Chapter 1. The Prison. There is a question I want you to sit with before we go any further. When was the last time you were bored? Not mildly restless. Not tired. Genuinely, uncomfortably, nothing to do bored. The kind of boredom where you have no phone in your hand, no screen in front of you, no podcast in your ears, no conversation to fill the silence. Just you, your thoughts, and time stretching out in every direction with nothing to grab onto. For most people reading this, the honest answer is that they cannot remember. And that answer is one of the most revealing things about the modern world. We have engineered boredom out of existence. Every waiting room, every commute, every meal, every moment of transition has been filled with content. The phone is always within reach. The notification is always 1 second away. The app is always open. And the result of this engineering is something that almost nobody is talking about honestly. We have lost the ability to be with ourselves. And when a person loses the ability to be with themselves, they lose access to the most important resource they will ever have, their own attention. The psychologist William James, writing more than a century ago, said that the faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention again and again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. He said that an education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. Read that one more time. The ability to bring your wandering attention back to where you choose to place it is the root of judgment, character, and will. Not intelligence, not talent, not connections, not even hard work, in the way most people think about it. The root is attention, directed, voluntary, deliberate attention. And that faculty is under attack right now in ways that would have been impossible to imagine even 20 years ago. Here is how the invisible prison works. It does not announce itself. It does not feel like a cage. In fact, it feels like freedom. It feels like connection. It feels like entertainment and information and belonging. But what is actually happening at the neurological level is something far more sinister. Every time you open a social media application, a system that has been engineered by some of the most brilliant minds on Earth specifically to capture and monetize your attention is analyzing your behavior in real time. It is learning what you pause on, what you scroll past, what makes you feel outraged, what makes you feel envious, what makes you feel inadequate, and what makes you feel seen. And then it is using that information to show you exactly the content most likely to keep you staring at the screen for one more minute. This is not an accident. Sean Parker, one of the co-founders of Facebook, said in 2017 that the application was designed to exploit a vulnerability in human psychology. The thought process was, how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? And the answer they found was by creating a social validation feedback loop, giving people a little dopamine hit every now and then when someone likes or comments on a photo or a post. A social validation feedback loop. Let that phrase land. It means that the applications you use every day were intentionally designed to make you emotionally dependent on external validation from strangers in order to keep you coming back. And that dependency is reshaping the architecture of your mind in ways most people do not realize until the damage is already done. Let me describe what that damage looks like in practical terms. Your attention span shortens. Research from Microsoft showed that the average human attention span dropped from 12 seconds in 2000 to 8 seconds by 2015, which means it fell below the attention span of a goldfish. Whether you accept those exact numbers or not, the directional trend is undeniable. Sustained attention has become harder for most people. Your tolerance for discomfort decreases. When every uncomfortable feeling can be instantly medicated by picking up a phone, your nervous system loses its training in sitting with difficulty. And the ability to sit with difficulty is precisely what separates the people who build extraordinary lives from those who do not. Your relationship with yourself deteriorates. When you never have to sit alone with your own thoughts, you never process those thoughts. You never integrate your experiences. You never hear the quiet voice inside you that is trying to tell you something important about your values, your desires, your wounds, and your direction. And your capacity for deep work collapses. Deep work, a concept developed brilliantly by author Cal Newport, refers to the ability to focus without distraction on a cognitively demanding task. It is the work that produces the most value. The work that builds skill, creates insight, solves real problems, and generates disproportionate results. And it requires sustained, uninterrupted attention for long stretches of time. Attention that most people in the modern world can barely access anymore. This is the invisible prison. It has no walls. It has no guards. It is built entirely from habits, algorithms, environmental cues, social pressures, and neurological conditioning that nobody explicitly chose, but almost everyone is living inside. And the first step toward freedom, the very first breakthrough in the monk mode journey, is the simple but radical act of seeing it clearly. Because you cannot change what you cannot see. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote that the first wealth is health. But I would add something to that. The first step toward wealth, toward health, toward any form of genuine transformation is awareness. Not motivation, not willpower, awareness. The moment you look at your phone usage statistics and feel the quiet shock of seeing how many hours you spent scrolling this week. The moment you notice that you reached for your phone before you even got out of bed this morning. The moment you catch yourself in the middle of a conversation, thinking about what you are going to post about it rather than actually experiencing it. These are moments of awareness, and they are precious because they are the beginning of choice. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps and wrote the extraordinary book Man's Search for Meaning, identified something fundamental about human psychology. He said that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom and our power to choose our response. The monk mode protocol is fundamentally about reclaiming that space. Right now, for most people, the space between stimulus and response has been collapsed to almost nothing. The phone buzzes and the hand moves. The feed appears and the scroll begins. The boredom surfaces and the entertainment appears. There is no gap, no choice, no freedom. This protocol will help you rebuild that gap. It will take time. It will feel uncomfortable. There will be moments where the silence feels like too much and the stillness feels unbearable. But on the other side of that discomfort is something most people never find. Themselves. Not the performed version. Not the version built for other people's approval. The actual self. The one with real desires and real values and real intelligence and real creative capacity that has been sitting silently in the background waiting for a moment of quiet long enough to be heard. Now, before we go further, I want to address something directly. Because when people hear the word prison, especially applied to their own lives, a part of them resists. A part of them says, that is not me. I am fine. I am in control. I can put the phone down whenever I want. And to that voice, I want to say something gentle but honest. If you can put the phone down whenever you want, put it down right now and do not pick it up for the next 6 hours. Most people discover, in attempting that experiment, that they cannot. Not because they are weak, not because they are addicted in the clinical sense, but because the environmental pull is so strong, so constant, and so cleverly engineered that choice alone is not enough to resist it. That is why the monk mode protocol is not about willpower. Willpower is a finite resource. Research by psychologist Roy Baumeister has demonstrated that decision fatigue is real, that the ability to resist temptation is like a muscle that gets tired. And attempting to rely on willpower to change your behavior while remaining inside an environment that is constantly triggering the behaviors you want to change is like trying to empty a bathtub while the tap is still running at full force. You need to turn off the tap. And that begins not with discipline, but with design. Not with trying harder, but with seeing more clearly. Not with fighting the prison, but with understanding how it was built. Because once you understand the architecture of the cage, you can begin to dismantle it. And in the next chapter, we are going to go deeper into one of the most powerful and most underestimated forces shaping your behavior every single day. We are going to talk about the environment. Because here is what the science is telling us, and what most self-help books still fail to communicate clearly enough. The environment always wins. Chapter 2. The environment always wins. Let me tell you about a study that changed the way behavioral scientists think about human behavior. In the 1970s, a researcher named James Reason was studying why highly trained, intelligent professionals made predictable errors in high-stakes environments. Pilots, surgeons, nuclear plant operators. These were not careless people. They were not lazy. They were not unintelligent. And yet they made the same kinds of mistakes, in the same kinds of situations, with remarkable consistency. What Reason found was that the errors were not primarily caused by individual failures of character or competence. They were caused by the design of the systems and environments those people were operating within. The environment was creating conditions that made certain errors almost inevitable, regardless of the skill or intention of the individual. He called this systems thinking about human error, and it quietly revolutionized everything from aviation safety to surgical protocols to nuclear plant design. But the implications extend far beyond professional settings. Because the same principle applies to your kitchen, your bedroom, your phone's home screen, your morning routine, the route you drive to work, the friends you eat lunch with. Every environment you inhabit is constantly sending your brain signals, and your brain is constantly responding to those signals in ways that are almost entirely automatic. The field of environmental psychology has spent decades documenting how powerfully our surroundings shape our behavior, our mood, our cognitive function, and our decision-making. And the conclusion is clear, consistent, and humbling. We are not nearly as autonomous as we believe. Brian Wansink, a food researcher at Cornell, spent years studying the relationship between eating behavior and environmental design. His findings were remarkable. When he gave people a larger bowl of soup, they ate more. Not because they were hungrier, not because the soup tasted better, but because the bowl was bigger. When the candy dish was placed on a desk, people ate significantly more candy than when it was placed across the room. The extra distance of 6 feet was enough to reduce consumption dramatically. The environment was making decisions that people believed they were making themselves. James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, built an entire philosophy on this insight. He argues that environment is the invisible hand that shapes human behavior, that most of us do not choose our behaviors as much as we default to the behaviors our environment makes easiest. The behavior that requires the least friction, the fewest steps, the clearest pathway. We follow the path of least resistance almost automatically, and the environment determines what that path looks like. This is why a person who genuinely wants to exercise will still skip the gym if the gym bag is not packed the night before, if the gym clothes are not visible, if the route to the gym is inconvenient. Not because they are lazy, because the environment has not been designed to support the intention. And this is why the person who genuinely wants to stop scrolling social media will still scroll until midnight if the phone is charging on the bedside table. Not because they lack willpower, because the environment is making the behavior easy and accessible and automatic. The solution is not to try harder. The solution is to redesign the environment. But here is where the monk mode protocol departs from most conventional advice about habit formation and environmental design. Most books about environment design will tell you to make small changes. Put your phone in another room. Put the fruit on the counter instead of the cookies. Change your desktop wallpaper to something inspiring. These are genuinely useful tactics, and they work to a meaningful degree. But they operate at the level of optimization. They are trying to improve the existing environment, to make it slightly more conducive to the behaviors you want. The monk mode protocol operates at a completely different level. It argues that for certain people at certain crossroads in their lives, the existing environment is not fixable by optimization. It is too compromised, too saturated with the triggers, the associations, the social dynamics, and the unconscious patterns that have produced the results you are no longer satisfied with. When a building's foundation is cracked, you do not solve the problem by redecorating the rooms. You address the foundation. And sometimes, addressing the foundation requires a temporary evacuation. This does not mean you have to physically move to a different city, although some people find that genuinely helpful. It means creating a psychological and behavioral environment that is radically different from the one that has been shaping you. It means changing what is visible in your physical space. What books are on your shelf versus what apps are on your phone. What you see when you walk into your workspace versus what you see when you sit on your couch. What is easy and accessible versus what requires friction and effort. It means changing the social environment. Who you spend time with, what conversations you are part of, what values and behaviors you are being normalized to through daily exposure. It means changing the informational environment. What you read, watch, listen to, and discuss. Because ideas are also environmental forces. The ideas you are most frequently exposed to become the ideas that feel most true to you, regardless of their actual validity. And it means changing the temporal environment. How you structure your time, what you do when you first wake up, what rituals you have built around your most important work, how you end your day. Let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like in practice. Imagine a person who wants to write a book. They have wanted to write it for years. They think about it often. They feel genuine passion for the subject. They have the intelligence and the ideas. And yet the book never gets written. Why? Because every morning, their environment makes everything else easier than writing. The phone is on the nightstand, so the morning begins with messages and notifications. The news app is on the first page of their phone, so anxiety and distraction enter before clarity. Their desk is buried under papers and objects that have nothing to do with writing, so the visual environment signals clutter rather than focus. Their friends and colleagues do not know about the writing project, so there is no social accountability. The coffee shop where they write is also where they meet friends for lunch, so it carries associations of socializing rather than deep work. None of these are dramatic obstacles. Each one is minor. But together, they constitute a complete environmental system that is silently working against the intention. The environment is not designed for writing. It is designed for everything else. And so everything else happens, and the book remains unwritten. Now redesign the environment. The phone goes into another room at night and does not return until after 2 hours of focused writing. The desk is cleared of everything except the tools needed for writing. A specific time, a specific place, and a specific routine are established that belong exclusively to the writing work. 2 or 3 trusted people are told about the project, creating social accountability. A separate coffee shop, one not associated with anything else, is designated as the writing space. The intention has not changed. The intelligence has not changed. The passion has not changed. But the environment has changed, and the book begins to be written. This is environmental design at the level of the individual. And when you scale it up to the full 180 days of the monk mode protocol, the effects compound into something extraordinary. Because here is what happens when you deliberately construct an environment specifically designed for one purpose, the purpose of becoming who you are capable of becoming. Your brain begins to rewire around that environment. The neural pathways associated with distraction and reactive behavior begin to weaken from disuse. The pathways associated with focus, deep work, reflection, and intentional action begin to strengthen. Neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity, and the research on it is deeply encouraging. The brain is not fixed. It is not a static organ handed to you at birth that slowly deteriorates over time. It is extraordinarily dynamic. It reshapes itself continuously in response to what you practice, what you attend to, and what environment you consistently inhabit. The psychologist Donald Hebb articulated what became known as Hebb's rule in 1949, and it is usually summarized this way. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Every time you sit down for an uninterrupted hour of deep, focused work, the neural network associated with that focus fires. And as it fires repeatedly, in a consistent environment, over weeks and months, the architecture of your brain begins to support that kind of focus as a default state rather than an effortful exception. And every time you reach for the phone in a moment of discomfort, the neural network associated with that escape fires. And as it fires repeatedly, that association strengthens. The discomfort triggers the reach, automatically, without conscious decision. This is why environment is not just a productivity tool. It is a neurological intervention. Now, I want to pause here and address something that comes up for a lot of people when they begin thinking seriously about redesigning their environment. And that is the question of relationships. Because your social environment is your most powerful environment. More powerful than your physical space, more powerful than your digital habits, more powerful than your daily schedule. The people you spend the most time with are shaping your behavior, your values, your ambitions, your standards, your sense of what is normal and what is possible, in ways that are almost invisible but profoundly real. We will explore this in much greater depth in the next chapter. But I want to plant this seed now because it is crucial. The famous saying attributed to motivational speaker Jim Rohn is that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. The research on social contagion, which we will discuss in detail, suggests this is not just a catchy phrase. It is a description of a genuine psychological phenomenon. Before you move on, I want to give you one practical exercise that bridges everything we have talked about in this chapter. Spend 20 minutes today doing what behavioral scientists call an environment audit. Walk slowly through the physical spaces you inhabit most. Your bedroom, your workspace, your kitchen, your living room. And as you walk, ask yourself one question about every object, surface, and arrangement you encounter. Does this support the person I am trying to become, or does it work against them? Be ruthlessly honest. The television positioned directly in your line of sight when you sit on the couch. The pile of unread books beside the device you actually use to scroll social media. The kitchen counter arrangement that makes it easier to eat the food you are trying to limit than the food you are trying to prioritize. The desk setup that is technically for work but functionally optimized for distraction. Write down everything you notice, not to immediately fix it, but to see it. Because the moment of seeing is the moment of power. The environment always wins. So in the monk mode protocol, you become the architect of the environment. And as we move forward, we are going to begin the hardest and most important redesign of all. We are going to talk about redesigning your social world, about the quiet courage it takes to protect your energy and your attention from the people who, however unintentionally, have been keeping you stuck. We are going to talk about the radical social reset. Chapter 3, The Radical Social Reset. Let me say something that self-help books often dance around, but rarely say directly. Some of the people in your life are incompatible with who you are becoming. That is not a judgment of their character. It is not a condemnation of the relationship. It is simply a recognition that human beings are enormously powerful environmental forces on one another, and that the people you spend significant time with are constantly, invisibly, shaping your identity, your ambitions, your standards, and your behavior. The social psychologist Solomon Asch demonstrated this in a series of famous experiments in the 1950s. He gathered groups of participants and asked them a simple question. He showed them 3 lines of obviously different lengths and asked which one matched a target line. The correct answer was unambiguous. Any person looking at the lines alone would answer correctly without hesitation. But Asch had secretly arranged for all but one participant to give the same wrong answer. And what happened was astonishing. A significant portion of the real participants gave the wrong answer too, not because they could not see, but because the social pressure of the group was strong enough to override their own direct perception of reality. This is the power of social environment. It can alter what people see, what people believe, what people think is true. Now think about your own social environment. Think about the conversations that fill most of your time. Are they expansive conversations about possibilities, about ideas, about growth and meaning, and what could be built? Or are they contracting conversations about other people's failures, about complaints, about why things cannot work, about the risks of trying something different? Think about the default emotional register of the people closest to you. Are they people who approach difficulty with resilience and curiosity, or with victimhood and resentment? Are they people who celebrate your growth, or who subtly, perhaps unconsciously, discourage it? Think about what is considered normal in your social circle. The level of ambition, the relationship with health and exercise, the attitude toward reading and learning, the financial habits, the work ethic. Because whatever is normal in your environment becomes normalized in your mind. And whatever is normalized in your mind becomes the unconscious benchmark against which you measure yourself. There is a concept in behavioral economics called the reference class. We do not evaluate our lives in absolute terms. We evaluate them relative to a reference class of people we compare ourselves to. And the people closest to us form the most powerful reference class we have. If everyone in your immediate circle struggles financially and accepts that as inevitable, struggling financially will feel normal and acceptable to you, regardless of what you consciously believe about your own potential. If everyone in your circle is sedentary and dismisses physical health as vanity, neglecting your body will feel like the reasonable, relatable choice. If everyone in your circle treats ambition with suspicion and celebrates mediocrity because it makes everyone feel safe together, pursuing your full potential will feel like betrayal. This is what it means when people say your network is your net worth. Not in the transactional, who you know networking sense. In the deeply psychological sense that the people around you are literally defining the boundaries of what feels possible and permissible in your own mind. So what does the monk mode protocol ask you to do about this? It does not ask you to abandon your relationships. It does not ask you to stop loving the people you love. It does not ask you to become cold or arrogant or dismissive. It asks you to do something more nuanced and more difficult. It asks you to become radically selective about where your time and energy go during this period. Think of your mental energy as a budget. You have a finite amount of it each day. Every interaction you have makes a withdrawal or a deposit. Some people leave you feeling energized, inspired, clear, and capable. Those are deposits. Some people leave you feeling drained, confused, small, or anxious. Those are withdrawals. During the monk mode protocol, the goal is to minimize the withdrawals as dramatically as possible. Not forever. Not because those relationships do not matter, but because you are in a rebuilding season, and rebuilding requires resources. And if your resources are constantly being depleted by draining relationships and exhausting social performances, you will not have enough left over for the deep work of transformation. This will feel uncomfortable. There will be guilt, especially if you are someone who has historically been the emotional caretaker in your relationships, the person who is always available, always helpful, always responsive. Taking yourself partially offline during this period will feel like abandonment. I want to offer you a reframe. When a caterpillar enters the chrysalis, it does not apologize to the other caterpillars for withdrawing. It does not feel guilty for the temporary absence. It knows, in whatever way a caterpillar knows anything, that the withdrawal is not a betrayal of the relationship. It is a prerequisite for becoming something that can contribute at a completely different level. You are not abandoning the people you love by going through a season of focused transformation. You are preparing to show up for them as someone stronger, more capable, more emotionally stable, and more genuinely present than you have ever been. Now, let me give you a framework for thinking about the relationships in your life during this period. The first category is what I call supporting relationships. These are the people who genuinely want you to grow, who celebrate your efforts even when they do not fully understand them, who respect your boundaries without requiring constant explanation, and who leave you feeling better for having spent time with them. These relationships should be maintained and even deepened during the monk mode protocol. Brief, meaningful, nourishing contact with people who support your growth is not a distraction. It is fuel. The second category is draining relationships. These are the people whose company consistently leaves you feeling exhausted, anxious, small, or confused. They may be kind people. They may love you. But the dynamic is not healthy for either of you right now. During the monk mode protocol, you need to reduce contact with these relationships as gracefully as possible. This does not require confrontation or coldness. It requires simply being less available, not picking up every call, not responding to every message immediately, not attending every social event, being gently, consistently, compassionately unavailable. The third category is what I call anchor relationships. These are the people who are not necessarily draining or supporting, but who are invested in keeping you exactly as you are. They may be old friends with whom you have a long history, but who no longer share your direction. They may be family members who love you deeply, but who feel threatened by your change. These are perhaps the most challenging relationships to navigate during the protocol, because they involve the most complexity and the most history. The approach here is similar to the draining relationships. Reduce contact temporarily, but also to begin having honest, gentle conversations about who you are becoming. Not declarations of superiority, not announcements of a new lifestyle, just quiet, honest conversations about what matters to you and why you are spending your time and energy differently right now. Some of these people will surprise you. Some of the anchors will become supporters once they understand what you are actually doing, and some will not. And learning to hold those relationships with care while not allowing them to determine your direction is one of the most important emotional skills you will develop during this period. There is a beautiful and practical idea that comes from Naval Ravikant, the entrepreneur and philosopher, who has written and spoken extensively about the importance of choosing your relationships with the same intentionality you would apply to choosing your investments. He says that the most important decision you will ever make is not what career to pursue or what city to live in. It is who you decide to spend your time with. Because the people you spend time with are not just shaping your present. They are building your future. The skills they have normalized, the ambitions they have made ordinary, the standards they have established, the habits they have made invisible because everyone in the group practices them. All of this is flowing into you continuously, whether you are aware of it or not. Now, I want to address a specific fear that comes up reliably when people begin thinking about the social withdrawal element of the monk mode protocol. The fear of loneliness. This is real, and it deserves honest acknowledgement. Human beings are social creatures at the deepest neurological level. The experience of loneliness activates the same regions of the brain as physical pain. It is not a character weakness. It is a hardwired survival signal. Our ancestors who drifted too far from the tribe did not survive. But here is the important distinction. There is a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the painful awareness of unwanted aloneness. It is characterized by a felt deficit, a sense that connection is needed but not available. Solitude is the chosen, deliberate experience of being alone. It is characterized by a felt fullness, a sense that the time alone is productive, restorative, and meaningful. The monk mode protocol is not designed to create loneliness. It is designed to create productive solitude. And the difference between those two experiences comes almost entirely from intention and design. When you intentionally reduce social contact during this period, you fill the space that opens up with purposeful activity, with deep work, with learning, with physical health, with emotional reflection, with creative expression, with the development of skills and capabilities that have been waiting for exactly this kind of quiet. And something unexpected begins to happen. As you become more deeply connected to your own inner life, As you develop a more authentic and honest relationship with yourself, the quality of your social connections improves dramatically. You begin to crave less of the shallow social contact that was previously filling your time and more of the deep, meaningful connection that actually nourishes the human spirit. You stop showing up to social gatherings because you are afraid of missing out and start showing up because you genuinely want to connect. And that shift from anxious social performance to genuine social presence is one of the most liberating experiences the monk mode protocol produces. There is one more element of the social reset that deserves careful attention, and that is the digital social world. The followers, the group chats, the comments, the likes, the stories, the posts. This online social environment is perhaps even more powerful than the in-person one because it is available 24 hours a day, engineered to maximize emotional engagement, and designed to make disconnection feel like social death. But that digital world deserves its own chapter, because what is happening in our brains when we engage with social media is a story that will fundamentally change how you see your phone. And that story begins right now. Chapter 4. The Digital Dopamine Reset. Your phone is not a communication device. It is a slot machine. That is not my metaphor. That is the observation of Tristan Harris, a former design ethicist at Google who spent years studying how technology companies design applications to be as addictive as possible. The variable reward schedule, which is the same mechanism that makes slot machines so psychologically compelling, is at the heart of how social media feeds are designed. Here's how it works. A slot machine is compelling not because it always pays out. If it paid out every time, it would quickly become boring. It is compelling because it pays out unpredictably, sometimes randomly. You never know if this pull of the lever is going to be the one that wins. And that unpredictability is precisely what makes the behavior almost impossible to stop. Now apply that to your social media feed. Every time you open the application, you do not know what you are going to find. Sometimes it is something that makes you feel seen, validated, or inspired. Sometimes it is something that makes you feel outraged or envious. Sometimes it is nothing particularly meaningful, but you never know in advance. And that variability, that unpredictability, that possibility that the next scroll will reveal something significant, keeps the behavior going far longer than any rational calculation would justify. This is not a coincidence. The behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner demonstrated in the 1950s that variable reward schedules produce the most persistent, most resistant to extinction behaviors of any reinforcement pattern. The technology companies that have built the most addictive applications in history have simply applied this well-established psychological finding at massive scale. And the neurotransmitter at the center of this story is dopamine. Andrew Huberman, the neuroscientist at Stanford, has done extensive work explaining what dopamine actually does and why understanding it is essential for anyone serious about performance, motivation, and well-being. The popular understanding of dopamine as the pleasure chemical is actually inaccurate. Dopamine is better understood as the anticipation and pursuit chemical. It is released not primarily when you get what you want, but when you expect that you might get what you want. It is the neurochemical engine of seeking behavior. And social media has hacked this system with extraordinary effectiveness. Every notification is a potential social reward. The little red dot on the app icon is a signal that something might be waiting for you, something that might matter, something that might make you feel valued, connected, or validated. The brain releases a small pulse of dopamine in response to that signal, motivating you to check. And then, once you have checked and engaged with whatever is there, the dopamine spike fades rapidly, and another notification appears, and the cycle continues. Over time, repeated exposure to these constant low-level dopamine stimulations has a measurable effect on the brain's reward system. The baseline level of dopamine activity adjusts downward because the brain is always trying to maintain equilibrium. This means that activities that would previously have felt genuinely enjoyable, a walk in nature, a conversation with a friend, reading a good book, sitting with your own creative thoughts, begin to feel flat and unrewarding compared to the constant stimulation of digital content. This is what psychologists call hedonic adaptation, and it is one of the most significant hidden costs of digital addiction. Not just the time you lose to scrolling, but the richness of your entire experience of life, diminished by comparison to a screen. Now here is what the monk mode protocol does about this. It asks you to go through a deliberate digital detox, not a casual one where you put your phone in your bag during dinner and call it a success. A genuine, structured, graduated withdrawal from the constant stimulation of digital content. The process works in stages. In the first 2 weeks of the protocol, you begin by removing the most compulsive applications from your phone's home screen. Not necessarily deleting them entirely, although that is better if you can manage it, but removing them from instant visibility, making them require deliberate effort to access, increasing the friction. Remember the environmental design principle from Chapter 2. Behavior follows the path of least resistance. If accessing Instagram requires 3 more steps than it previously did, a meaningful percentage of the automatic, unconscious reaches for it will fall away. During the same 2-week period, you establish phone-free zones and phone-free times. The bedroom is the most important phone-free zone because the quality of your sleep directly determines the quality of every subsequent waking hour, and we will talk about this in detail in the chapter on physical health. No phone in the bedroom means your morning is not immediately colonized by the digital world. It means your sleep is not disrupted by notifications. It means the first hour and the last hour of your day belong to you. From weeks 3 through 6, you begin a more comprehensive reduction. Most social media applications are removed or placed on a 30-day deletion trial. You replace the time with things from your monk mode priority list, which you will develop during this period. Exercise, deep work on a skill or project, reading books instead of reading content, walking in nature, cooking, journaling, creating. By the end of the first 30 days, most people report something that surprises them deeply. They do not miss it the way they expected to. The anxiety of disconnection, which feels catastrophic before it begins, turns out to be relatively brief. It peaks in the first 3 to 7 days and then begins to fade. And as it fades, something extraordinary begins to emerge in the space it occupied. Creativity. The mind, no longer fed a continuous stream of external content to react to, begins to generate its own. Ideas begin to surface. Connections form between concepts that had been living separately. Curiosity returns. Not the shallow curiosity of clicking on clickbait headlines, but genuine, deep curiosity about things that matter to you specifically. This is what Pascal was pointing at when he wrote about sitting quietly in a room. The mind, given silence and space, does not go empty. It goes rich. Naval Ravikant has spoken about this beautifully. He talks about the concept of a clear mind as the foundation for genuine insight and creativity. He argues that most people's minds are so full of noise, so saturated with other people's thoughts and opinions and content, that there is simply no room for their own original thinking to emerge. The digital detox is not about deprivation. It is about clearing space for what was always there beneath the noise. Now, there is a phase of the digital detox that most people do not prepare for adequately, and that is what I call the boredom window. The period, usually somewhere in the first 2 to 4 weeks, where you have removed the constant stimulation but have not yet developed the capacity to enjoy solitude and the alternative activities that will eventually replace it. This window feels terrible. It feels like restlessness, anxiety, purposelessness, and an almost physical discomfort that is hard to describe to anyone who has not experienced it. Your hand reaches for a phone that is not there. Your mind reaches for content that is not coming. And in the absence of external stimulation, you come face to face with the thoughts and feelings you have been scrolling past for years. This is actually the most important moment in the entire protocol, because those thoughts and feelings are not dangerous. They are information. They are the messages your inner life has been trying to send you for years while you were too busy reacting to a screen to receive them. The anxiety is telling you something about what you are worried about. The restlessness is telling you something about what you genuinely desire. The discomfort is telling you something about what has been unresolved and unprocessed. And the boredom, especially the boredom, is telling you that your creative mind is hungry. Psychologists have found in research studies that people who allow themselves to experience boredom without immediately escaping it perform significantly better on subsequent tests of creative thinking. The experience of boredom appears to activate the brain's default mode network, which is the neural system associated with imagination, future thinking, self-reflection, and creative insight. In other words, boredom is the incubator of creativity. And by engineering boredom out of your life with constant digital stimulation, you have also been engineering out the creative thinking, the self-reflection, and the quiet insight that those empty moments would have produced. The monk mode protocol gives those moments back to you, not as empty time to endure, as raw material to create with. And what you begin to create in that reclaimed time and reclaimed attention is what the next chapter is all about. Because once your attention is free from the grip of the dopamine machine, you can do something extraordinary with it. You can do deep work. Chapter 5. Building the Deep Work Engine. There is a question I ask people who are frustrated by their lack of progress in building the life they want. I ask them to estimate, honestly, how many hours of their last week were spent in a state of completely undistracted, fully focused, cognitively demanding work on something that genuinely matters to their long-term goals. Not meetings, not emails, not scrolling research, not administrative tasks, not the work they do while simultaneously monitoring their phone for notifications. Genuinely undistracted, deeply focused work on their most important skills, projects, or ambitions. For most people, the honest answer is somewhere between 0 and 2 hours. Sometimes 0. Now I ask them how many hours they spend each week in exactly that kind of focused state as a non-negotiable, protected daily ritual. For most people, again, the answer is close to 0. And then I point out the obvious. If the ability to create disproportionate value in the world, to build rare and valuable skills, to generate genuine insight, to create work that stands out in a crowded market, requires long stretches of completely undistracted deep focus, and the average person is getting less than 2 hours of that per week, then the gap between where people are and where they want to be is not a mystery. It is arithmetic. Cal Newport defined deep work as professional activities performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that push your cognitive capabilities to their limit. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. And he argued, compellingly and correctly, that deep work is becoming simultaneously more valuable and more rare. More valuable because the global economy increasingly rewards people who can think deeply, create insightfully, and solve complex problems. More rare because the constant connectivity and distraction of modern professional culture is making it increasingly difficult for most people to access deep focus states at all. This creates an extraordinary opportunity for anyone willing to do the work of protecting and developing their deep work capacity. Because if most people are operating at 1 to 2 hours of real focus per week, and you begin operating at 4 to 6 hours of real focus per day, the compounding effect on your skill development, your creative output, and your career or business trajectory is difficult to overstate. Let me explain why, with a concept from cognitive science called deliberate practice. The psychologist Anders Ericsson spent decades studying what actually produces expert-level performance. His research on violinists, chess players, athletes, surgeons, and musicians led to a finding that contradicted the popular assumption that talent is the primary determinant of exceptional performance. What he found was that the distinguishing factor was not raw talent. It was the quantity and quality of deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is a specific kind of practice. It is not the kind of practice where you do what you already know how to do, where you stay in the comfortable zone of existing competence. It is practice at the edge of your current ability, where each session is designed to stretch you in specific ways, where you receive clear feedback on errors, and where you are fully cognitively engaged for the entire duration. This kind of practice requires deep focus. You cannot engage in deliberate practice while monitoring your phone, watching television in the background, or operating in a state of continuous partial attention. It demands your full, undivided cognitive engagement. And Ericsson's research suggested that even elite performers have a limit to how much genuinely deliberate, deeply focused practice they can sustain in a single day. The upper limit for most people, even trained experts, appears to be approximately 4 to 5 hours of truly focused deliberate practice. Beyond that, the quality degrades. But most people, in their current environment and with their current habits, are nowhere near that limit. They are nowhere near the floor of what would produce meaningful improvement, let alone the ceiling. The monk mode protocol is designed to help you build toward that floor consistently over 180 days. And what happens over that kind of sustained, protected deep work practice is transformative in ways that are difficult to anticipate from the outside. Skills develop with a velocity that surprises people. The brain's neuroplasticity means that skills built through deliberate practice literally reshape the brain, creating richer, faster, more efficient neural networks in the areas being trained. 180 days of consistent, deliberate deep work on any skill will produce a level of competence that would take most people 3 to 5 years to reach in their ordinary, distracted state. This is not hyperbole. This is the mathematics of focus time. If you protect 4 hours of deep work per day and sustain it for 180 days, you accumulate 720 hours of deliberate practice. To put that in perspective, in ordinary life, with the average of 2 hours of unfocused semi-work per week, reaching 720 hours would take nearly 7 years. You are compressing 7 years into 6 months. Now, building the deep work engine requires more than just carving out time. It requires understanding and working with the neuroscience of focus and flow. The psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying what he called the optimal experience, the state in which people are so fully absorbed in a challenging and meaningful activity that time seems to stop, self-consciousness disappears, and performance elevates to its highest possible level. He called this state flow. Flow states are not accidental. They are produced by a specific set of conditions that can be intentionally cultivated. Research on flow has identified several consistent prerequisites. The first is clear goals. You need to know specifically what you are working on and what success looks like. Vague intentions do not produce flow. Clear, specific, measurable targets for each deep work session do. The second is immediate feedback. You need to be able to tell, in real time, whether you are making progress. This is why creative work with visible output, where you can see what you have produced, tends to enter flow more readily than abstract strategic thinking without clear milestones. The third is the right challenge to skill ratio. Flow occurs in the zone between anxiety and boredom. When a task is too far above your current skill level, anxiety prevents focus. When it is too far below, boredom does. The sweet spot is at the frontier of your current capability, just beyond what is comfortable, but not so far that it feels impossible. The fourth, and perhaps most important for the monk mode context, is the elimination of distraction. Flow requires approximately 20 to 30 minutes of uninterrupted focus before the state fully establishes. And any interruption, a notification, a conversation, a thought about something else that needs to be done, completely shatters the state and requires another 20 to 30 minutes to rebuild. This is why even a single notification can cost you an hour of productive flow time. Knowing this, the deep work engine of the monk mode protocol is built around 4 practices. The first practice is the deep work ritual. Every day of the protocol begins with a protected block of deep work time, ideally 2 to 4 hours, that begins before the digital world is engaged and before the social demands of the day begin. This block is treated as inviolable. It is not negotiable. It does not get moved for meetings, for emails, for phone calls, or for social commitments that could happen at any other time. This block belongs to the most important skill or project you are building during the protocol. The second practice is the deep work environment. The physical space in which deep work happens is configured to support focus as completely as possible. This means phone out of the room or in airplane mode. Notifications completely disabled. A clean, organized workspace that signals focus rather than chaos. Background conditions, whether complete silence or a consistent, non-lyrical audio environment that your brain learns to associate with deep concentration. The third practice is deep work scheduling. Counterintuitively, scheduling your deep work in advance to the specific hour and day dramatically increases the probability that it actually happens. Research on implementation intentions, studied extensively by the psychologist Peter Gallwitzer, shows that when people specify in advance when, where, and how they will perform a specific behavior, the probability of follow-through increases dramatically. It is not enough to intend to do deep work. The intention needs to be encoded as a specific, scheduled commitment. The fourth practice is progressive overload of attention. Just as physical training requires progressively increasing challenge to build physical capacity, developing deep work capacity requires progressively increasing the duration and intensity of focus sessions. If you currently manage 30 minutes of genuine focus before distraction overwhelms you, start there. Build to 45, then to 60, then to 90. The capacity for sustained focus is trainable, and during the monk mode protocol, you are systematically training it. Now I want to talk about what you actually do during the deep work sessions. Because the deep work engine is not an end in itself. It is a mechanism for building something. And during the monk mode protocol, that something should be chosen with great care. The most powerful allocation of deep work time during this period falls into two broad categories. The first is skill building, identifying 1 to 3 valuable skills that are most relevant to your long-term financial and professional goals, and spending the majority of your deep work time deliberately practicing and developing those skills. The more valuable and rare the skill, and the more clearly you can see how mastering it would change your economic position, the better. The second is creating, using the skills you are building to actually create things of value. Writing, designing, building, coding, teaching, analyzing, whatever your domain. The act of creating something that did not exist before, something that could potentially create value for other people, is the most direct path from where you are to where you want to be financially and professionally. Because here is the quiet truth about financial transformation that most people overlook. Money is a byproduct of value created, and the most scalable, most sustainable path to creating financial value is to develop rare and valuable skills, and then use those skills to create things or solve problems that serve other people meaningfully. The monk mode protocol does not promise you wealth. It promises you time, focus, and environment. What you do with those resources determines everything that follows. But the identity that drives those choices is something we have not yet talked about. And it is perhaps the most important element of all. Because before habits change, before behaviors change, before outcomes change, something deeper has to shift. The story you tell yourself about who you are. Chapter 6. Identity Before Habits. There is a fundamental error at the heart of most people's attempts at self-improvement. They focus on outcomes. They focus on behaviors. And they completely overlook the foundation on which outcomes and behaviors are built. Identity. James Clear wrote about this with particular clarity in Atomic Habits. He describes 3 layers at which change can occur. The outermost layer is outcomes, what you get. The middle layer is processes, what you do. And the innermost layer is identity, who you believe you are. Most people start with outcomes and work inward. I want to lose 30 pounds, so I will start going to the gym and eating less. They define the goal, design a process, and hope that the motivation to pursue the outcome will sustain the process long enough to produce results. And it sometimes works, for a while. But the reason most behavioral changes do not stick, the reason people go back to old habits with depressing regularity, is that the behavioral change was never supported by an identity change. The person who goes to the gym and eats differently still fundamentally believes, at the level of their self-concept, that they are someone who struggles with health and discipline. And identity is enormously powerful at pulling behavior back toward itself. The person who believes they are a smoker will eventually return to smoking, even after months of not smoking, because their identity calls them back. The person who believes they are bad with money will eventually return to financial mismanagement, even after a period of responsible spending, because the identity reasserts itself. But Clear also shows us the flip side of this dynamic, and it is genuinely transformative. When identity changes first, behavior follows naturally, without the grinding effortfulness of pure willpower. The person who does not think of themselves as someone who struggles with discipline, but as someone who is becoming disciplined, who approaches every decision through the lens of what a disciplined person would choose, behaves differently. Not because they are forcing themselves to be different, but because their decisions are now being generated by a different identity. The behavior is downstream of the belief. So the question for the monk mode protocol is not just what habits do I want to build. It is who do I need to become for those habits to feel natural. And answering that question honestly requires something that is both simple and extraordinarily challenging. Self-examination. You need to identify the current stories you tell yourself about who you are. The beliefs that have been operating in the background of your life, often since childhood, shaping every decision and every interpretation of every experience. Stories like, I am not the kind of person who succeeds financially, or I am not disciplined by nature, or I have always struggled with relationships. Or, I am not as smart or talented as the people who succeed at what I want to do. These stories feel like facts. They feel like accurate descriptions of a fixed reality. But they are not facts. They are narratives. And narratives can be changed. The philosopher William James, widely considered the father of American psychology, said that the greatest revolution of his generation was the discovery that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes of mind. What James was pointing at is what we now understand through modern psychology and neuroscience. The stories we tell ourselves about ourselves are not neutral observations. They are active architects of our experience and behavior. So how does identity change happen? It does not happen through affirmations alone, although positive self-talk has its role. It does not happen through a single transformative moment, although those moments can catalyze the process. It happens through accumulated evidence. Every time you take an action consistent with the identity you want to develop, you create a small piece of evidence that this new identity is real. Every early morning workout is a vote for the identity of someone who prioritizes physical health. Every deep work session is a vote for the identity of someone who builds skills seriously. Every moment of choosing reflection over reactive scrolling is a vote for the identity of someone who values their own inner life. James Clear calls this the process of casting votes for your desired identity. And over the 180 days of the monk mode protocol, you are casting hundreds, potentially thousands, of these votes. And the cumulative weight of that evidence begins to shift the identity. The story changes from I am trying to become disciplined to I am disciplined. From I am working on my health to I am someone who takes care of my body. From I want to build something meaningful to I am building something meaningful. There is a specific practice I want to offer you here that accelerates identity reconstruction dramatically. It is the practice of the identity journal. Each morning during the monk mode protocol, before you begin your deep work session and before you engage with the digital world, you spend 10 to 15 minutes writing in a journal. But not just any kind of journaling. Specifically, you write as if you are already the person you are becoming. Not as aspiration, as a present tense description of who you already are. You might write something like, I am someone who shows up for my work every day without needing external motivation. I am building skills and capabilities that compound over time. I make decisions based on my long-term values rather than short-term impulses. I am in the process of creating a life that reflects what I genuinely care about. Write it. Read it. Feel the resonance of it. Notice where it feels false. Because where it feels false is where the old identity is still holding on. And that resistance is useful information. It tells you exactly where the internal work needs to happen. Over time, something remarkable begins to occur. The morning writing practice begins to feel less like aspirational fiction and more like accurate self-description. Not because you are deceiving yourself, but because the daily votes of behavior are accumulating into genuine change, and the identity is being updated to reflect the reality of who you are actually becoming. The psychologist Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset is relevant here. Dweck distinguished between two fundamental orientations toward intelligence and ability. The fixed mindset, which believes that qualities like intelligence, talent, and character are fixed traits that you either have or you do not. And the growth mindset, which understands those qualities as developable through effort, strategy, and learning from setbacks. The monk mode protocol is built entirely on a growth mindset foundation. Not because growth mindset is a nice-sounding philosophy, but because the neuroscience of neuroplasticity confirms that it is accurate. The brain literally changes in response to practice, experience, and focused effort. The person you are today is genuinely not fixed. It is a temporary state, a current configuration, and the monk mode protocol is the most deliberate and intensive reconfiguration process available to anyone willing to commit to it. One more dimension of identity reconstruction deserves attention here, and it is perhaps the most psychologically profound: the dimension of self-worth. Many people approach transformation from a posture of inadequacy. They want to change because they believe they are not enough. They believe that if they could just achieve X, or build Y, or become Z, then they would finally deserve to feel good about themselves. Their identity project is driven by shame. And transformation driven by shame produces a very particular, very tragic dynamic. Even when the external goals are achieved, the feeling of inadequacy returns. Because it was never actually about the goal. It was about the underlying story of unworthiness. And that story does not change just because a goal is accomplished. The monk mode protocol invites a completely different relationship with transformation. You are not doing this because you are not enough. You are doing this because you are more than the life your current environment has been able to accommodate. There is a version of you that exists, not in the future, but as a latent potential in the present, that has been waiting for exactly this kind of protected season of intentional development. That version does not need to be earned. It does not need to be proven worthy. It simply needs to be given the conditions to emerge. And those conditions are what the rest of this protocol provides. Starting with the most fundamental and most overlooked condition of all, a body that actually works. Chapter 7. Rebuilding the body that carries your dreams. Everything you want to build during the monk mode protocol, every skill you want to develop, every project you want to create, every transformation you want to undergo, happens inside a body. That body is the hardware running your entire operation. And if the hardware is poorly maintained, the performance of everything that depends on it suffers. This is not a chapter about aesthetics. I am not going to tell you that you need to look a certain way or reach a certain number on the scale to be worthy of the transformation you are pursuing. I am going to tell you something far more important and far more practical. The quality of your physical health directly and measurably determines the quality of your mental performance, your emotional regulation, your creative capacity, your resilience under pressure, and your ability to sustain the focus required for everything else in this protocol. Let us start with sleep, because sleep is not optional. It is foundational. And most people in the modern world are operating in a state of chronic sleep insufficiency that is degrading their cognitive performance, emotional stability, and physical health in ways they are entirely attributing to other causes. Matthew Walker, the neuroscientist at UC Berkeley and author of Why We Sleep, describes sleep as the single most effective thing you can do to reset your brain and body health each day. His research, and the research of hundreds of other sleep scientists, has documented the consequences of sleep deprivation with stunning comprehensiveness. After just one night of 5 or 6 hours of sleep instead of the 7 to 9 that most adults require, your prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain responsible for rational decision-making, impulse control, and complex problem-solving, shows measurable impairment. Your amygdala, the region responsible for emotional reactivity, becomes hyperactive. You become more reactive, less rational, less creative, less empathetic, and less capable in almost every dimension that matters. And here is the insidious part. Sleep deprivation impairs your ability to accurately assess your own impairment. People who are severely sleep-deprived consistently rate their performance as much better than objective measures show it to be. You do not feel as impaired as you actually are. The measure of the impairment is compromised by the very state causing it. During the monk mode protocol, sleep becomes non-negotiable. 7 to 9 hours of good quality sleep per night is the foundation on which every other element of the protocol rests. And achieving good sleep quality requires a set of environmental and behavioral conditions, many of which align perfectly with what the protocol is already doing. No bright light exposure in the last 1 to 2 hours before sleep. Darkness in the bedroom that is as complete as possible. A cool bedroom temperature, ideally around 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 to 20 degrees Celsius. No screens in the bedroom. A consistent sleep and wake time that anchors the body's circadian rhythm. These are not difficult requirements. They are simply requirements that most people have been ignoring because the default modern environment makes ignoring them easy. Andrew Huberman has contributed enormously to public understanding of the science of sleep, particularly the role of morning light exposure. His research and synthesis confirm that getting bright outdoor light, ideally sunlight, in your eyes within the first 30 to 60 minutes of waking powerfully anchors the circadian rhythm and sets up optimal sleep quality 14 to 16 hours later. This is a completely free, zero side effect intervention that most people are not doing. During the monk mode protocol, morning sunlight exposure becomes a daily anchor. Not because it is pleasant, though it often is. Because it is neurologically effective. Now let us talk about exercise. The evidence for the cognitive and mental health benefits of regular exercise is, at this point, overwhelming. Exercise has been shown in peer-reviewed research to increase the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which Huberman and others have called miracle grow for the brain. BDNF promotes the growth of new neurons, strengthens synaptic connections, and is associated with improved learning, memory, and cognitive flexibility. Exercise has also been shown to be one of the most effective interventions for depression and anxiety available. Some studies suggest its effectiveness rivals that of pharmacological interventions for mild to moderate depression, with none of the side effects and all of the physical health benefits as a bonus. During the monk mode protocol, daily movement is non-negotiable, but the specific form of that movement should be matched to your starting point and your goals. I will offer a general framework. 3 to 4 sessions per week of resistance training, which can mean weight training, body weight exercises, resistance bands, or any other form of training that challenges your muscles against resistance. The evidence for the cognitive, hormonal, and metabolic benefits of resistance training is particularly compelling. 3 to 4 sessions per week of cardiovascular training, including at least 1 or 2 sessions of Zone 2 cardio, which refers to aerobic exercise at a pace where you can still hold a conversation but are breathing noticeably harder than at rest. Zone 2 training has been shown by researchers including Inigo San Millan to be particularly effective at improving metabolic health, mitochondrial function, and cardiovascular efficiency. Daily walking, ideally in natural settings when possible. The combination of gentle movement, light exposure, and contact with nature has been shown to have significant positive effects on mood, stress levels, and creative thinking. Now let us talk about nutrition, because this is an area where confusion is rampant and good information is obscured by commercial interests and ideological tribalism. I am not going to prescribe a specific diet, because the research on individual variation in nutritional response is real and meaningful. But I am going to share the areas of broad consensus among nutrition researchers that are relevant to cognitive performance and sustained energy. Minimizing ultra-processed foods significantly improves almost every marker of physical and mental health in most people. These are foods that have been heavily industrially processed and contain long lists of ingredients including refined sugars, refined flours, seed oils, and artificial additives. The evidence linking ultra-processed food consumption to inflammation, cognitive impairment, mood disorders, and metabolic dysfunction is consistent and compelling. Adequate protein intake is particularly important during this period because you are likely increasing your exercise volume, your cognitive demands, and your overall metabolic requirements. Most nutrition researchers advising on performance suggest targeting protein intake between 0.7 and 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. Hydration is chronically neglected and dramatically underestimated in its effects on cognitive performance. Even mild dehydration, 2% of body weight, has been shown to impair working memory, attention, and psychomotor performance. During the monk mode protocol, drink water consistently throughout the day and before thirst is felt, because thirst is already a sign of meaningful dehydration. Regarding caffeine, which is the most widely used psychoactive substance in the world, the research is clear that caffeine can meaningfully improve alertness, focus, and cognitive performance. But Huberman's work on sleep strongly recommends delaying caffeine consumption for the first 90 to 120 minutes after waking, allowing the brain's adenosine system to clear naturally before caffeine is introduced. This produces better sustained energy throughout the day and significantly reduces the afternoon energy crashes that many people experience. Finally, in this chapter, I want to talk about the relationship between hormonal health and transformation. Testosterone, in both men and women, is significantly influenced by sleep quality, exercise frequency and type, stress levels, and body composition. Testosterone is not just a sex hormone. It is a key driver of energy, motivation, confidence, cognitive clarity, and the capacity to handle stress effectively. Cortisol, the stress hormone, has a powerful bidirectional relationship with the behaviors the monk mode protocol is building. Chronic stress elevates cortisol, which suppresses testosterone, impairs sleep quality, promotes fat storage particularly around the abdomen, and impairs immune function and cognitive performance. The reduction of digital stimulation, social drama, and reactive behavior that the protocol produces meaningfully lowers chronic cortisol exposure. And the increase in exercise, sleep quality, and nutritional quality further supports a healthier hormonal profile. The body that emerges from 180 days of this protocol is genuinely different, not just in appearance, although that often changes significantly, but in its internal biochemistry, in the quality of the energy it generates, in the clarity of the mind it houses, in the resilience it provides against stress and setback. But even a perfectly maintained body can carry deep wounds that no amount of exercise or sleep can reach. And those wounds deserve their own chapter. Because the monk mode protocol is not only about building external capability, it is about healing what has been quietly breaking things from the inside. Chapter 8. Healing the Inner Noise. In every life, there are things that happen that were not supposed to happen. Loss, in its many forms. Betrayal, from people who were supposed to be safe. Failure, that left marks deeper than the event itself. Shame, accumulated through experiences and words that should never have landed the way they did. Grief, that never had space to be fully processed. And most people carry these things through their lives in a particular way. Not fully healed, not fully acknowledged, but managed, compartmentalized, pushed below the surface of daily busyness and numbed by the constant noise of modern life. The monk mode protocol, by stripping away much of that noise, creates conditions in which those managed wounds are more likely to surface. This is not a bug. It is a feature, and it is why this chapter exists. Because healing the inner noise is not optional for genuine transformation. You cannot build a new life on an unexamined foundation. The patterns, the reactivity, the fears, the limiting beliefs, the relationship dysfunctions that have been quietly producing the same unwanted results in your life for years, they are not primarily caused by a lack of information or skill. They are caused by unprocessed emotional content that has been organizing your behavior from below the level of conscious awareness. The psychologist Bessel van der Kolk, in his landmark work The Body Keeps the Score, documented with extraordinary thoroughness how unprocessed trauma, and here I use trauma broadly to include the accumulated weight of difficult experiences that overwhelmed a person's capacity to process them, does not disappear over time. It gets stored in the nervous system, in the body, in the patterns of reactivity and protection that become the architecture of personality. And the behaviors that people most struggle to change, the addictions, the avoidance, the chronic procrastination, the relationship patterns that keep producing the same painful dynamics, are very often not failures of willpower. They are protective responses that made sense in a context that no longer exists. Understanding this is an act of enormous self-compassion. The person who numbs difficult feelings with food is not weak. They found a strategy that worked when they had no better options. The person who avoids intimate vulnerability is not broken. They learned that vulnerability was dangerous in the environments where they were formed. The person who procrastinates on their most important goals is not lazy. They may be avoiding the terror of failure or the responsibility of success that somewhere in their inner architecture has been coded as dangerous. Seeing these patterns without judgment, as strategies rather than character flaws, is the beginning of genuine healing. So how does the monk mode protocol support emotional healing? It does so through 4 primary practices. The first practice is meditation. And I want to be careful here, because the word meditation carries a lot of baggage. I am not asking you to empty your mind, to achieve enlightenment, or to sit in impossible stillness for hours. I am asking you to practice, for 20 minutes each day, the simple and profound act of watching your thoughts without being swept away by them. The technique most supported by research and most accessible to beginners is what is called mindfulness meditation. You sit comfortably, close your eyes, and bring your attention to the physical sensation of breathing, the rise and fall of the chest or belly, the feeling of air entering and leaving the nostrils. When your attention wanders, which it will, many times, you simply notice that it has wandered and gently bring it back. Without self-criticism, without frustration, just a gentle return. This sounds too simple to be powerful, but what you are actually doing at the neurological level is training the same capacity we discussed in the context of deep work. The capacity to notice when attention has drifted and voluntarily redirect it. You are also, over time, developing a relationship with your own mental activity that is one of the most useful psychological resources available. You begin to observe thoughts as events that arise and pass, rather than as commands that must be obeyed or truths that must be believed. This shift in relationship to thought is genuinely transformative for emotional well-being. Researchers at Harvard, including Sarah Lazar, have documented that regular mindfulness meditation produces measurable changes in the structure of the brain, including increased thickness in the prefrontal cortex and decreased reactivity in the amygdala. The brain of a person who has meditated regularly for several months is measurably different from the brain of someone who has not. The second practice is journaling. Not journaling as venting, not journaling as complaint, journaling as inquiry, as the practice of bringing language to experience, which is one of the most powerful psychological processing tools available to human beings. The psychologist James Pennebaker has studied expressive writing for decades and has documented its consistently positive effects on psychological and physical health. His research shows that writing about emotionally significant experiences with genuine depth and honesty produces meaningful improvements in immune function, psychological well-being, and cognitive clarity, not just in the short term, over months and years. During the monk mode protocol, journaling serves several specific functions. It externalizes thoughts, moving them from the swirling, recursive loops of internal rumination onto the page where they can be examined more objectively. It creates a record of your growth and transformation that becomes enormously valuable and motivating as the months progress. It provides a safe space to explore the uncomfortable feelings and unresolved questions that the silence of the protocol surfaces. And it serves as a thinking tool for processing the insights, ideas, and revelations that emerge during deep work and meditation. I recommend a specific journaling practice during this period. At the end of each day, spend 15 to 20 minutes writing responses to 3 questions. What did I notice today in my thoughts, feelings, and reactions that surprised or interested me? What am I genuinely grateful for right now? And why does it matter to me specifically? What would I do differently tomorrow if I were operating as my best, most intentional self? The third practice is what I will call emotional processing work. This refers to the deliberate engagement with the difficult feelings, memories, and patterns that the silence of the protocol is likely to surface. This can take many forms. For some people, it involves working with a therapist or counselor during this period. And I want to say directly that if you have access to skilled professional therapeutic support, using it during the monk mode protocol is one of the most powerful investments you can make in your transformation. The combination of the protocol's environmental changes and the depth of work possible in therapeutic relationship can produce changes that would take years in ordinary circumstances. For others, emotional processing work involves practices like somatic movement, the use of physical movement to process and release stored emotional tension in the body, or practices like deliberate exposure, gently and intentionally approaching difficult memories or feelings rather than avoiding them, which is at the heart of many evidence-based therapeutic approaches. For many people during this period, it simply involves sitting with difficult feelings long enough for them to complete their natural arc rather than escaping into distraction. Because the most important thing to understand about difficult emotions is that they are not permanent states. They are processes. They arise, they intensify, they peak, and they subside. And when you allow them to complete that process rather than interrupting it with distraction, they gradually lose their power to control your behavior. The fourth practice is the cultivation of self-compassion. This is perhaps the most underrated psychological skill in the context of transformation. The research of psychologist Kristen Neff has demonstrated that self-compassion, defined as treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding you would offer a good friend in a similar situation, produces better outcomes for motivation, resilience, and long-term well-being than self-criticism and harsh self-judgment. This contradicts the popular belief that being hard on yourself is what produces high performance. The research says otherwise. Self-criticism triggers the threat response in the nervous system, flooding the body with stress hormones and narrowing thinking to defensive processing. Self-compassion activates the care system, producing feelings of safety and support that allow more expansive, creative thinking and more resilient recovery from setbacks. During the monk mode protocol, you will have difficult days. You will miss a deep work session. You will reach for the phone when you intended not to. You will feel lonely or discouraged or uncertain. And when those moments come, the practice of self-compassion is not about lowering your standards or excusing the behavior. It is about acknowledging the difficulty honestly, treating yourself with the kindness that difficulty deserves, and returning to your practice without the additional burden of shame. As the emotional layers clear, as the inner noise quiets, something else begins to emerge. Something that has been there all along, waiting beneath the static. Silence, not as absence, as presence. And in that silence, something extraordinary becomes available. Chapter 9. The Power Hidden Inside Silence. There is a paradox at the heart of the modern productivity conversation. We are more connected to more information than any humans in history. More content is produced and consumed every day than our ancestors encountered in entire lifetimes. And yet, by most measures of deep thinking, genuine insight, and original creative contribution, we are not more productive. We are less. The paradox resolves when you understand that creativity, insight, and wisdom are not produced by more input. They are produced by the processing of input. And processing requires silence. Every great idea you have ever had came to you in a moment of quiet. In the shower, on a walk, in the half-awake twilight of early morning before the day began. In those rare moments when the stream of incoming information slowed enough for your inner processing to surface something from the depths. This is not coincidence. The neuroscience behind it is elegant. The brain has two primary modes of operation that are relevant to this discussion. The task-positive network, which is active when you are focused on specific external tasks, and the default mode network, which is active when you are at rest, daydreaming, letting your mind wander. For most of human history, the default mode network was activated regularly by the natural rhythms of life. Time spent in nature, in transit, in quiet, in undirected rest. The brain had regular opportunities to shift into this mode of operation and do the work that only it can do. When the default mode network is active, the brain does not go idle. It consolidates memories, integrating the experiences of the day and extracting patterns and meaning. It generates simulations of future scenarios, helping to plan and prepare for what might come. It processes social and emotional experiences, working through interpersonal situations and emotional events. And it produces what researchers describe as creative insight, the spontaneous connection of previously unrelated ideas that produces genuine originality. This last function, creative insight through the default mode network, is the source of the ideas that change lives. The business idea that has been waiting to crystallize. The solution to a problem that has been resisting conscious analysis. The clarity about a relationship or career direction that has been obscured by complexity. These insights do not come from more information. They come from periods of quiet that allow the brain to synthesize what it already has. And here is the painful modern reality. Constant digital engagement suppresses default mode network activity. When we are constantly scrolling, watching, listening, and responding to external content, we are constantly activating the task-positive network and suppressing the default mode. We are essentially preventing the brain from doing some of its most important work. The monk mode protocol's digital detox is therefore not just about removing distraction in the conventional sense. It is about restoring the neurological conditions for creative insight. And as those conditions are restored, people who have not had an original idea in years begin to have ideas. Writers who have been creatively blocked for months begin to find language. Entrepreneurs who have been trying to identify the right direction begin to feel clarity emerging. The solutions and insights that no amount of information gathering could produce begin to surface naturally from the quiet. The key is learning to be comfortable with the discomfort of silence long enough for these deeper processes to complete. Because silence is uncomfortable at first, especially for people who have been avoiding it. Solitude researcher Christopher Long and psychologist James Averill describe genuine solitude as a state that requires a degree of psychological courage. The courage to face what surfaces when the noise stops. The courage to sit with the unfilled space without immediately trying to fill it. The courage to be with yourself without the performance of productivity or sociality. But that courage, exercised repeatedly, builds into something remarkable. Philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who somehow managed to develop profound inner wisdom while governing the Roman Empire at its peak, wrote in his private journals, known to us as meditations, that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. the power over your own mind, the ability to direct your attention, to sit with silence, to not be at the mercy of every passing thought or external trigger, is not a personality trait. It is a skill. And like every skill in this protocol, it is developed through deliberate practice. The practice of productive solitude during the monk mode protocol has several specific forms. The first is unstructured time, deliberately scheduled. This sounds contradictory, deliberately scheduling unstructured time, but it is necessary in the modern context because unstructured time is not something most people stumble into naturally anymore. It must be protected. During the protocol, at least 1 hour each day is designated as genuinely unstructured. No agenda, no screen, no content, just space. What you do with it, whether you walk, sit, stare at the ceiling, sketch, let your mind wander through whatever it wants to wander through, is entirely open. The only rule is no external input of content. The second practice is contemplative walking. Walking in natural settings, without headphones and without a phone in hand, is one of the most powerful and accessible practices for activating the default mode network and accessing the creative, integrative thinking that it produces. There is substantial research showing that even brief nature exposure reduces cortisol, improves mood, restores attentional capacity, and promotes the kind of diffuse, associative thinking that produces insight. Henry David Thoreau, Darwin, Einstein, Beethoven, all were legendary walkers who understood intuitively what neuroscience has since confirmed. Walking thinks for you in a way that sitting cannot. The third practice is deep listening. In the moments of silence that the protocol creates, practice turning your attention inward with genuine curiosity. Not to analyze or judge what you find, simply to listen. What is underneath the surface thoughts? What feelings are present that you have been too busy to acknowledge? What questions are your inner life trying to raise that you keep deferring by staying busy? This practice, over time, builds what psychologists call interoceptive awareness, the ability to perceive and accurately interpret the internal states of your own body and emotional system. And interoceptive awareness is strongly correlated with emotional intelligence, decision-making quality, and psychological well-being. The fourth practice is the cultivation of what the Stoics called equanimity, the quality of being undisturbed by the fluctuations of circumstance, not the absence of emotion, not emotional numbness, but a stable, grounded relationship with your inner life that allows you to experience the full range of human feeling without being enslaved by any of it. Equanimity does not come from having everything figured out. It comes from trusting the process you are in, from having built enough evidence through your daily practices that you can weather difficult days without losing your footing, from developing the quiet confidence, not arrogance, that comes from consistently showing up for yourself in the ways that matter most. And that quiet confidence, earned through consistent action under the conditions this protocol creates, is the raw material of the most powerful force in human achievement. Discipline. Not the harsh, punishing, white-knuckle discipline that most people imagine when they hear the word, but the deep, sustainable, life-organizing discipline that is built not from motivation, but from systems. Chapter 10. Discipline that outlives motivation. Here is something that nobody who has ever built a meaningful life will tell you in a motivational speech. They were not motivated every day, not even close. The person who built the business that changed their financial life had mornings where they did not want to open the laptop. The person who transformed their physical health had afternoons where the couch was more appealing than the gym. The person who wrote the book that changed how people think had sessions where every word felt wrong and every paragraph felt hopeless. And they showed up anyway. Not because they had found a secret source of endless motivation that lesser humans have not discovered, but because they had built systems that made showing up the path of least resistance, regardless of how they felt. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings, by their nature, fluctuate. They are influenced by sleep quality, by what you ate, by the conversations you had yesterday, by the weather, by the memory of a disappointment that surfaced while you were in the shower. Feelings are not reliable as the primary driver of disciplined behavior. They were never designed for that role. Systems are reliable, and the discipline that outlives motivation is built from systems. What is a system in this context? A system is an architecture of environment, routine, and commitment that makes the desired behavior happen automatically, regardless of how you feel. It removes the daily decision of whether to do the important thing and replaces it with a structure within which not doing it requires more active effort than doing it. The morning deep work ritual is a system. The phone-free bedroom is a system. The scheduled workout that happens at the same time every day, with the clothes already laid out, and a commitment made to a training partner or coach, is a system. The weekly review that assesses progress and adjusts plans is a system. Systems reduce the reliance on motivation by reducing the number of decisions that need to be made. Every decision requires energy, and the decision about whether to do the important thing, made fresh each morning, is an enormous energy drain that most people are losing before their workday even begins. The system eliminates that decision. The important thing happens because the system says so, not because motivation shows up on cue. The philosopher-economist Herbert Simon, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on decision-making, described what he called bounded rationality, the idea that human decision-making is limited by the information available, the cognitive limitations of the mind, and the finite amount of time available for deliberation. We do not, he argued, make optimal decisions. We make decisions that are good enough given our current cognitive and informational resources. And when those cognitive resources are depleted by a morning of constant small decisions, the quality of every subsequent decision degrades. This is why the most important choices of the day should be made when cognitive resources are highest, and why as many of the routine choices as possible should be eliminated by pre-commitment through systems. The monk mode protocol is built on this foundation of pre-commitment. Before the protocol begins, you design the systems. You decide in advance what time you wake up, what you do first, what you do second, when you train, when you eat, when you do deep work, when you end the day. These decisions are made once, in advance, with full cognitive resources, when you are thinking about your long-term goals and values rather than reacting to how you feel in the moment. And then the system runs, day after day, not perfectly, because nothing runs perfectly, but consistently enough to produce the compounding effect that only consistency can produce. Let me talk about delayed gratification, because it is inseparable from the kind of discipline we are discussing. The Stanford Marshmallow Experiment, conducted by Walter Mischel in the late 1960s and early 1970s, offered young children a choice. They could eat one marshmallow now, or wait 15 minutes and receive 2 marshmallows. The experiment measured which children could delay gratification and which could not. What made the experiment famous was the follow-up research, conducted over the subsequent decades, which found that the children who had been able to delay gratification as 4-year-olds showed significantly better outcomes as adults. Higher SAT scores, better social functioning, better stress management, higher educational attainment, lower rates of substance abuse. But subsequent research, building on Mischel's work, added an important nuance. The ability to delay gratification was not, as it appeared, simply a fixed personality trait. It was heavily influenced by environmental and contextual factors. Children who had been shown to be unreliable at delaying gratification in ordinary circumstances could learn to do so with the right environmental supports and strategies. Now let us talk about setbacks, because they will happen. In 180 days of any genuine transformation attempt, there will be missed sessions, broken streaks, difficult weeks, moments of doubt so strong they feel like certainty. The question is not whether setbacks will occur. The question is what your relationship with setbacks will be when they do. Most people have an all-or-nothing relationship with their own consistency. One missed workout becomes 2, then 3, and then the entire habit unravels because the story that emerges from the first miss is, I failed, I broke my streak, I am back to being the kind of person who does not exercise. The setback is treated as evidence for the old identity. The monk mode protocol teaches a different relationship with setbacks. James Clear describes this as the rule of never missing twice. You may miss once. Life is unpredictable. Illness happens. Family demands arise. Unexpected crises occur. Missing once is not a failure. It is a human event. But you commit to never missing twice. Because the second miss is where the story starts to form. The first is a blip. The second is the beginning of a pattern. Beyond never missing twice, the monk mode protocol treats setbacks as information rather than judgment. When a session is missed or a habit is broken, The useful questions are not why am I such a failure and how did this go wrong? They are what specific circumstance caused this, and what can I change in my system to prevent it from happening again? This is the system's thinking response to setback. Not shame. Design. There is one more dimension of sustainable discipline that I want to address, and that is the concept of identity-based recovery. When you have built a clear identity as someone who shows up for their practice, as someone whose standards around their own development are non-negotiable, setbacks do not threaten that identity at the foundational level. They are events within an identity, rather than evidence against it. The person who identifies as an athlete does not stop being an athlete because they had a bad training week. They recover, they adjust, and they return. Because the return is the expression of the identity. And as that identity becomes more deeply established through the accumulating evidence of consistent action over months, the pull back from setbacks becomes faster and more automatic. Not because the difficult days stop being difficult, but because the question of whether to return has already been answered by who you know yourself to be. The discipline that outlives motivation is not rigidity. It is identity. It is knowing, deeply and evidentially, that you are someone who does the work. And that knowledge pulls you forward through every circumstance in which motivation would have already given up. As that identity solidifies, as the systems run and the habits compound and the discipline deepens, something else begins to clarify. The answer to the question that all of this work is ultimately in service of. What is the life worth building? What is worth returning to the world to contribute? Chapter 11. Designing a life worth returning to. There is a difference between planning your life and designing it. Planning is a forward projection of what currently exists. You take where you are, you add goals and timelines, and you try to construct a path from here to a slightly improved version of there. Designing is something different. It begins not with where you are, but with a vision of what you are ultimately trying to create. It works backward from meaning, from purpose, from a clear articulation of what genuinely matters to you and what kind of contribution you want to make. And it asks, what would need to be true for that vision to be my actual life? Most people plan. Very few design. And the monk mode protocol, particularly in its latter phases when the deep work engine is running and the identity is shifting and the inner healing is progressing, is uniquely suited to the work of genuine design. Because design requires clarity. It requires honest self-knowledge. It requires the willingness to let go of what other people think your life should look like and follow the thread of what actually resonates with who you are becoming. And the silence and solitude of the protocol create the conditions for that clarity to emerge. Let me offer you a framework for this design process, which I call the 3 horizons of intentional living. The first horizon is immediate. Who do you need to be and what do you need to build in the next 12 months that would make a meaningful difference in the quality of your life and the trajectory of your future? This is the practical, actionable horizon. The skills you want to develop, the financial position you want to move toward, the health practices you want to establish, the creative projects you want to begin or complete, the relationships you want to invest in. The second horizon is medium term. Looking 5 to 10 years forward, what does the life that would feel genuinely worth living look like? Not the life that looks impressive from the outside. Not the life that your parents or your culture or your social circle would approve of. The life that you, in your most honest and most private self, would feel good about living. What are you working toward? What are you contributing to? What kind of person are you in that vision? The third horizon is legacy. When your life is eventually reviewed, what do you want to have mattered? What traces of your having been here do you want to remain? Not monuments or fame necessarily, though those are valid if genuinely meaningful to you. What values do you want to have lived by? What relationships do you want to have built and honored? What problems do you want to have helped solve? What do you want the people who knew you best to say about who you were? These 3 horizons are not separate planning exercises. They are a single continuous thread. The legacy horizon gives meaning to the medium horizon. The medium horizon gives direction to the immediate horizon. And the immediate horizon is where the daily actions of the monk mode protocol are oriented. This framework transforms the deep work sessions from time spent building skills in the abstract to time spent building deliberately toward a vision that is genuinely your own. Let me talk about financial design specifically because it is something that deserves honest and practical attention. The monk mode protocol is not a get-rich-quick scheme. but it is one of the most powerful wealth-building frameworks available to anyone willing to commit to it, precisely because it combines three things that compound together with extraordinary power over time. Valuable skills, built through deep work. The capacity to do the kind of focused, high-quality work that commands disproportionate compensation in the market. Reduced consumption and distraction, creating more time, more energy, and often more available financial resources during the protocol period itself. And a longer time horizon, because the identity that emerges from the protocol is one that naturally takes a longer view, that delays gratification more easily, that makes investment decisions based on 10-year outcomes rather than next-week feelings. The financial framework of the monk mode protocol operates on the principle that financial independence is ultimately built on the margin between what you earn and what you spend, invested consistently in assets that appreciate over time. This principle sounds simple because it is, but it is extremely difficult to act on in an environment that is constantly stimulating spending, constantly distracting from skill development, and constantly offering instant gratification as an alternative to long-term investment. The protocol removes much of that environmental pressure, and in the resulting clarity, the financial design becomes both more visible and more achievable. During the latter half of the protocol, specifically in the period between the 90th and the 180th day, begin mapping your three horizons with as much specificity as possible. Write them, revise them, discuss them in the journaling practice. Let them evolve as the clarity develops. The first version will not be the final version, but the act of articulating them, of giving language and form to what you are actually working toward, transforms the abstract aspiration into a concrete direction. And direction, clear and personally meaningful direction, is one of the most powerful forces available to the human mind. Viktor Frankl argued, from the depths of the most extreme suffering imaginable, that the primary human motivation is not pleasure or the avoidance of pain. It is the search for meaning. He observed, in the concentration camps where he was imprisoned, that the people who survived were not always the physically strongest or the most optimistic. They were the ones who had found a reason to survive, a purpose that made the suffering endurable and the effort worthwhile. You are not in a concentration camp, but the principle is universal in its application. When your actions are in service of something genuinely meaningful to you, the discipline required to sustain those actions does not feel like sacrifice. It feels like expression, like integrity, like becoming more fully yourself. And that is the most sustainable motivation of all. Chapter 12. The Re-Entry Protocol. There is a phenomenon in the psychology of behavioral change that is not discussed nearly enough. The return. What happens when the period of structured transformation ends and the person re-enters the world that originally produced the patterns they worked so hard to change? For many people, the answer is depressingly predictable. The environment reasserts itself. The old social dynamics reconstitute. The digital stimulation resumes. The old habits, which were never fully replaced at the identity level, re-emerge under the environmental pressure that originally installed them. And within weeks or months, much of what was built during the structured period has been eroded. This is not inevitable, but preventing it requires a re-entry protocol that is as intentional as the monk mode period itself. Think of it this way. An astronaut who returns from 6 months on the International Space Station does not walk off the spacecraft and immediately return to normal life. Their body has been profoundly altered by the conditions of space. Their muscles have atrophied. Their cardiovascular system has adapted to a zero-gravity environment. Their bones have lost density. Re-entry requires a structured period of rehabilitation, of gradual readaptation to Earth's conditions. You are returning from a different kind of mission, but the principle is the same. The environment you are returning to has the same gravitational pull it always had, the same social dynamics, the same digital stimulation, the same cultural pressures, and your newly rebuilt mind and body, while stronger than when you left, are also freshly constructed. The new patterns have not yet been tested and reinforced under the full pressure of ordinary life. Re-entry, therefore, is not the end of the protocol. It is the final, and in some ways most challenging phase. The first principle of re-entry is graduated exposure. Do not attempt to fully re-engage with all of the elements of ordinary social and digital life immediately. Choose which elements to reintroduce first, which ones to approach more gradually, and which ones to evaluate carefully before reintroducing at all. Begin with the relationships you have identified as genuinely supporting. Re-engage with these people fully, bringing the emotional clarity and presence that the protocol has developed. These relationships will likely feel different, richer, more authentic than they did before. Because you are different, and the kind of presence you can offer from a more grounded, less reactive place is genuinely more nourishing for both of you. Reintroduce the social world gradually, maintaining the phone-free morning ritual and the protected deep work period throughout. These two practices are the most important infrastructure to preserve because they anchor the day in the new identity before the external world can begin its familiar pull. The digital world should be reintroduced most carefully of all. If you have been free of social media for the duration of the protocol, approaching its reintroduction with genuine deliberateness is essential. Ask yourself, before reinstalling any application, what specific value does this application provide in my life? And does that value justify the cost in attention, emotional reactivity, and time? For some applications, the honest answer will be yes. There are legitimate professional and personal uses for social media that, when engaged with intentionally and with clear boundaries, do not need to be the attention-consuming addictions they were before the protocol. For others, the honest answer will be no, and those applications should not return at all. The second principle of re-entry is the non-negotiable core. During the planning phase before the protocol ends, identify the 5 to 7 practices that are most central to who you have become during this period and most essential to maintaining the gains of the protocol. These are your non-negotiables. They happen regardless of social pressure, regardless of busyness, regardless of the pull of old patterns. The non-negotiables might include your morning deep work session, your daily exercise, your phone-free sleep environment, your weekly review practice, your regular journaling. Whatever they are named explicitly and protected fiercely. Everything else in the re-entry world is negotiable. These are not. The third principle is the identity anchor. You are not returning to the world as the person who left. You are entering the world as someone new. And that identity needs to be consistently affirmed in the face of environments and relationships that do not yet know who you have become and may unconsciously try to re-establish the old dynamics. This does not require announcement or performance. It requires quiet, consistent action. When the old social dynamics try to reconstitute, you simply respond from the new identity. When the old environment offers the old cues, you follow the new patterns. When people who knew you before interact with you in the old ways, you respond in the new ways. The consistency of your behavior will, over time, update the expectations and dynamics of the people around you. Some relationships will adapt beautifully. The people who genuinely love you will meet the new version of you and find things to love in what is new. Some relationships will struggle. The people who were invested in the old version, who felt comfortable with your old patterns because those patterns served a dynamic that worked for them, may resist the change. And navigating those relationships with compassion and clarity is one of the most sophisticated emotional skills the protocol has prepared you for. The fourth principle of re-entry is the ongoing review. The weekly review practice, which you will have established during the protocol, is the single most powerful maintenance tool you have. Every week, spend 1 to 2 hours reviewing the previous 7 days against your 3 horizons. What actions were consistent with your vision? What were not? What circumstances or dynamics triggered old patterns? What adjustments to your environment or systems would prevent those triggers from producing the same result next week? This ongoing course correction prevents the gradual drift that swallows most well-intentioned transformations. Not a dramatic relapse, not a sudden breakdown, just the slow, almost imperceptible accumulation of small compromises, each of which seems harmless in isolation, that adds up over months to a near-complete erosion of what was built. The weekly review sees those compromises before they compound, and seeing them is, as always, the beginning of choice. One more element of the re-entry protocol deserves careful attention. The relationships you encounter may include people who were in your life before the protocol and who themselves have not changed. People who are still inside the invisible prison, still scrolling, still stuck, still managing rather than healing, still planning rather than designing. How you relate to these people matters enormously. for both your own maintenance and for the quality of your re-entry relationships. The temptation for someone who has been through a genuine transformation is to become evangelical about it, to want to share everything you have learned, to encourage everyone around you to do what you have done, to feel frustrated when the people you care about do not seem to see what now seems obvious to you. Resist this temptation almost entirely, not because what you have learned is not worth sharing, but because transformation is a personal journey that cannot be given. It can only be chosen. And the most powerful way to influence the people you care about is not to lecture them about what they should be doing differently. It is to show them, through the quiet evidence of your own changed life, what is possible. The person who loses 30 pounds and regains their energy inspires more people to prioritize their health than any amount of unsolicited dietary advice. The person who builds a meaningful income through their deeply developed skills inspires more people to invest in learning than any workshop on financial freedom. Live it. That is the re-entry contribution. And as you settle into this new life, as the re-entry stabilizes and the practices become permanent and the identity becomes unshakable, you arrive at the final destination of the monk mode journey. Not a destination in the geographic sense, not an achievement to be unlocked or a level to be reached. A way of being. Chapter 13. The New Identity. Let me tell you something about who you are becoming. Not who you will be when you are perfect. Not who you will be when you have achieved every goal on your list. Who you are becoming, right now, through the process of this protocol. Through the decision to take your own transformation seriously. Through the daily practice of showing up for the things that matter most, even on the days when it is hard. You are becoming someone who knows the difference between noise and signal. Someone who has learned, through difficult and rewarding experience, that the most valuable things in life are not found in the constant stream of external stimulation. They are found in the quiet places, in the deep work, in the honest conversation with yourself in the morning, in the clarity that comes from a well-slept, well-exercised, well-nourished body and mind. You are becoming someone with a different relationship to time, not the anxious, reactive relationship of someone perpetually catching up, but the intentional, designed relationship of someone who knows what they are building and why they are building it, and who has created the systems to ensure that the building continues regardless of circumstance. You are becoming someone whose identity is self-authored, not inherited, not performed, not constructed for the approval of others. Built deliberately through the daily casting of votes for the person you have chosen to become. And you are becoming someone who understands, at a level that most people never reach, that the journey of personal development does not end. There is no final destination. There is no version of you that is complete, finished, requiring no further growth. There is only the next edge of your capability, the next layer of depth to be explored, the next skill to be developed, the next dimension of your humanity to be understood and integrated. This is not a burden. It is a gift. The permanent frontier of your own becoming is one of the most remarkable features of human consciousness. There is always more. And the person who has learned to live at that frontier, to operate at the edge of their current capability with curiosity rather than anxiety, with engagement rather than dread, has discovered one of the deepest sources of meaning available to a human life. Ralph Waldo Emerson, writing in the 19th century with a wisdom that feels more relevant now than ever, said that to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. The monk mode protocol is ultimately an act of self-recovery, a recovery of the self that was always there beneath the accumulated layers of distraction, performance, adaptation, and numbing. Not a reinvention, a revelation. As you move through the months and years after this protocol, maintaining and deepening the practices it has established, you will find that the relationship between discipline and freedom inverts from what most people expect. Most people experience discipline as the enemy of freedom, as restriction, as limitation, as doing what you do not want to do instead of what you want to do. But people who have actually built deep discipline discover the opposite. Discipline is the precondition of freedom. The person with the disciplined body is freer in their physical life than the person whose body is controlled by default habits and poor health. The person with the disciplined mind is freer in their thinking than the person whose attention is controlled by algorithms and social pressure. The person with the disciplined financial life is freer in their choices than the person whose options are limited by financial constraints built through years of unconscious spending. Real freedom is not the absence of structure. It is the presence of mastery. And mastery is built through exactly the kind of disciplined, deliberate, long-term focused effort that the monk mode protocol installs. The new identity that emerges from this process is not characterized by superiority. It is characterized by depth. The depth of self-knowledge that comes from honest introspection. The depth of skill that comes from deliberate practice. The depth of character that comes from doing the difficult thing consistently over time. The depth of compassion that comes from having faced and processed your own wounds rather than projecting them outward. This depth does not make you separate from the world. It makes you more capable of genuinely serving it. The person who has done the hard inner work, who has cleaned up their own thinking and healed their own wounds and built their own genuine capabilities, has so much more to offer the world than the person who is still mostly operating from patterns they never chose and wounds they never examined. Let me speak to the question of legacy one more time, because as the monk mode journey matures, this question becomes increasingly important and increasingly answerable. Legacy is not about scale. The most profound legacies are often invisible to the world at large. The parent who was genuinely present for their children, who modeled what it means to live with intention and dignity, leaves a legacy that echoes through generations in ways that never make headlines. The teacher who saw something in a student that no one else saw, who took the time to meet that student at their actual edge of growth, leaves a legacy that ripples through every person that student subsequently touches. The friend who was honest when honesty was needed and kind when kindness was needed, who showed up in the specific ways that mattered, leaves a legacy in the lives of the people they loved. These are the legacies that the monk mode protocol is ultimately designed to enable, not by making you famous or wealthy or impressive, but by making you genuinely capable of depth, of presence, of sustained contribution, of honest relationship, of meaningful work. Because when a person is operating from their deepest and most authentic self, with clear values and developed skills and emotional intelligence and genuine self-knowledge, the natural expression of that self is contribution, care, creation, connection, not because those things are obligations, but because they are the natural expression of a fully realized human being. And that, finally, is what the monk mode protocol is actually for. Not to make you better than you were, not to make you better than other people, but to help you become more fully, more honestly, more completely yourself. We have traveled a long way together in these pages. We began in the invisible prison of modern attention, surrounded by the noise of a world that profits from our distraction and depends on our reactive engagement to sustain itself. We examined the environmental forces that shape behavior so powerfully that willpower alone cannot consistently overcome them. We explored the social dimensions of transformation, the quiet courage it takes to protect your energy and your direction from the people and dynamics that, however lovingly, have been keeping you in a familiar but limiting place. We went deep into the neuroscience of digital addiction, into the dopamine loops that have colonized our attention, and the extraordinary creative and cognitive richness that becomes available when those loops are disrupted and the brain is allowed to do its most important work. We built the deep work engine and understood why focused, deliberate skill development over 180 protected days is not just a productivity strategy, but an act of profound self-investment. We examined the identity at the root of all behavioral change and learned that transformation at the behavioral level must be preceded and supported by transformation at the level of self-concept. We rebuilt the body that carries every dream, restoring the physical foundation on which all other performance rests. We descended into the inner noise and began the sometimes uncomfortable but ultimately liberating work of healing the emotional architecture that has been running our lives from below the level of conscious awareness. We discovered the extraordinary power hidden inside silence and learned that boredom and solitude are not empty states to be endured, but conditions richly productive of the creative insight and self-knowledge that ordinary busy life makes nearly impossible. We built the sustainable discipline that outlives motivation, grounding it not in harsh self-judgment, but in systems, identity, and a design relationship with our own behavior. We designed a life worth returning to, giving all of this work a direction and a meaning rooted not in performance or approval, but in genuine values and purpose. We moved through the re-entry protocol and understood that returning to the world is its own discipline, requiring the same intentionality and the same system thinking as the monk mode period itself. And we arrived at the new identity, the version of yourself that was always there, waiting beneath the years of accumulated distraction and the noise of a world that had very little interest in your becoming. And now I want to leave you with something I hope you will carry long after this audiobook ends. The transformation this protocol describes is not about becoming someone else. Let me say that again, because it is the most important thing I want you to take from everything we have discussed. You are not trying to become someone else. You are trying to remove everything that is obscuring who you already are. Every distraction that has colonized your attention. Every relationship that has normalized a smaller version of yourself. Every habit that has kept you comfortable in a life that was never quite the right fit. Every fear that has been mistaken for a fact about your limitations. Every noise, internal and external, that has drowned out the quiet, persistent voice of your own deepest wisdom. The person who emerges from the monk mode protocol is not a manufactured version of what a self-help book says a successful person looks like. They are you, more clearly, more fully, more honestly you than you have been in years. Perhaps more fully yourself than you have ever been. And that person, that fully present, deeply grounded, honestly self-knowing version of you, is more than enough. More than enough to build what you want to build, to heal what needs healing, to contribute what only you can contribute, to love the people in your life with the depth and presence they deserve, to create the work that only your specific combination of experience, perspective, and developed skill could produce. The world does not need another perfect performance of a self-help success story. It needs you, actually you, the one who has done the work of knowing themselves honestly, building themselves deliberately, and showing up with the full weight of their genuine presence. So begin. Today, not when you feel ready, not when circumstances are better, not when you have more time or more resources or more certainty about the outcome. Today. Begin with one practice. The morning deep work session. The phone in another room at night. The first honest journaling entry. The walk without headphones. The conversation with yourself in the mirror about who you have been and who you are capable of becoming. One practice, done with genuine commitment, is the beginning of everything. And on the morning, 6 months from now, when you sit quietly in the early light with the stillness of a changed mind, with the energy of a rebuilt body, with the clarity of a healed heart and a designed direction, you will understand what all of this was for. Not the goals you will have accomplished, though those will matter. Not the skills you will have built, though those will be real. Not the identity you will have reconstructed, though that will be your foundation. You will understand it in the quality of the silence, in the feeling of being, for perhaps the first time, genuinely at home in your own mind, in the quiet, unperformable knowledge that you did the work. Not for anyone else's approval, not to impress anyone, because you believed and acted on the belief that you were worth the effort. That belief was right. You are worth the effort. Now go become who you have always been.